Je vais simplement présenter les collègues de ce soir en français, et puis après, bien sûr, la conférence se fera en anglais, car nous avons deux collègues qui exercent aux États-Unis. Donc, Fredrick JONSSON et Dipesh CHAKRABARTY sont tous les deux professeurs d'histoire à l'Université de Chicago, donc ça permet de les présenter efficacement tous les deux. Dipesh CHAKRABARTY est un des acteurs prépondérants du débat historiographique et théorique sur l'Anthropocène depuis désormais une quinzaine d'années. Et une partie importante de ses travaux sont maintenant publiés, dont dans quelques jours, je ne sais pas quand exactement, mais l'apparition imminente de son dernier livre, Une planète, plusieurs mondes. Et c'est d'ailleurs Dipesh qui lancera la discussion tout de suite. Et à sa droite, Fredrick JONSSON, dont les travaux vont très bientôt, je viens de l'apprendre, être publiés en français, qui a travaillé abondamment sur l'histoire des Lumières, l'histoire environnementale des Lumières, et plus récemment qui a publié un livre qui s'appelait simplement en anglais Scarcity. Donc je ne sais pas comment d'ailleurs la traduction va être faite, rareté tout simplement. Et donc c'est Fredrick qui commentera, développera les premières réflexions de Dipesh tout à l'heure. Je donnerai quelques commentaires additionnels pour terminer en fonction du temps qui nous reste. Voilà. So Dipesh, you have the room. Welcome. Thank you for being there. And the room is yours. You have your one.
Thank you. And bonsoir is how far my French will go. So please forgive me for not being able to speak in French. Deeply honored to be here with my two colleagues. My everyday colleague in physical presence, my everyday colleague in my mind, Pierre CHARBONNIER, and also deeply honored that you're all here. So what I will do very quickly is probably share 3 or 4 thoughts quickly in terms of where I think we are at with climate change. So the first point I want to make is that if you forgot about climate change and environmental problems, then we live in a world that would make the Harvard psychologist Steve Pinker very happy. Because if you look at the facts of human life, you will find that in the last 70 years, technology, including medical technology, all kinds of technology, have helped us, and this they've done over a longer period of time, as Fredrick will explain, but in the last 70 years, everything about human beings, our life expectancy, the number of people we can actually support on the planet, that's all gone up. So human beings were 1.6 million in 1900. 2000 we were 1.6 billion. And in 2000, we were 6 billion, now close to 8. Life expectancy average before the 18th century was about 30, they say. Before the Second World War, it was under 50. Now it's over 70 in many places. And American pension advisors always tell me I'm 75, they tell me to prepare to live another 20 years. I don't want to, but they say, we'll keep you alive. That's the nature of technology. Even if you don't want to. So, and the other thing is, it was in 1986 that we had 1 billion consumers, people who buy cars and refrigerators. Today, the global estimate is we are 3.5 billion consumers. Every second billion has been added faster than the previous billion. In 2000, the developed countries, the OECD countries, produced 70% of the consumers. Now their share is like 35%. The rest of the consumers come from India, China, African nations that are coming up, Latin American nations. So first of all, there is this. So on the other hand, there are 2.5 billion people without fresh water, who are not part of this consuming world. And I'll come back to that question. But inside societies like China or India, you feel societies have become what I call escalator societies. So before my eyes, I've seen people become richer. The Chinese claim that they pulled people out of poverty is not without reason. But all of this is thanks to the availability of plentiful and cheap energy, mainly supplied by fossil fuels. So the climate crisis, the environmental crisis is a bill. You go to a 5-star hotel, you live it up, and then somebody suddenly comes and, but the bill is like, future generations will get the bigger bill, and they'll say, your grandparent came and lived in this luxurious hotel, didn't pay the bills, you have to pay the bill now. So behind all this is technology. There's an American scientist, Peter Haff, who says that if you take out all the technologies we have, electricity and everything, human population will crash to 11 million. So it is thanks to technology that humans have, at least substantial number of humans, 3.5 billion people, have lived so well that humans never have in the past. And that it shows up in all kinds of statistics. But the second point I want to make is that this technology itself was something that allowed us to marginalize the things that normally remind us of the existence of the planet and what it does. And these two things are, apart from other things, are seasons and weather. So if you go to a peasant society, if you go to an indigenous society, pre-industrial societies always had to care about whether the sun was shining or whether it was raining too much, whether it was too hot, whether there was a drought. Pierre's book on liberty and affluence has a wonderful quote from Joseph Pierre Proudhon when the railways were invented, and it's a beautiful passage, but which I've read. Same thing has been said by many other people in many other contexts, but Proudhon said it, and I was interested in reading Proudhon saying it because of my interest in Marx's polemic with this man. He says, wonderful, now we will be able to travel in bad weather. When the British came to India, one of the things they became proud of is creating what they called all-weather roads. Before the British came, even wars were seasonal. If it rained too much, your powder got wet. If it rained too much and the river was in torrents, you couldn't cross the river. Your animals couldn't cross the river. So, and just to give a very personal example, I grew up in India knowing mango to be a summer fruit. You never got mangoes in any other season. Now I eat mangoes right through the year because of refrigeration technology. So actually the technology, the human capacity to create both very cold temperatures and very high temperatures have been life-saving, but environment destroying. But remember that without the technology of refrigeration, we would not have been able to transport the corona vaccine from one part of the world to another without container ships, refrigerated tanks, tanks, and not being able to store them. The vaccine had to be imported and then stored. So all of those things that actually sustains life with technology. So this technology has created a kind of, I was saying, it's made the sky into an object of aesthetic appreciation. When you meet each other on a bright day, you say, what a beautiful day. And the countryside becomes landscape, which is aestheticization. Whereas there was a time in all human societies where these were life and death questions, whether in rain. So a friend of mine, Patrick Joyce, has written a book called Remembering Peasants, which is actually about European peasantry. And he's just one generation away from an Irish peasant family, and he talks about this. So the first point was what has saved lives, so you could think of climate change as coming out of what I call the building of an infrastructure for human life. The second point I was making was that this infrastructure was fundamentally, in a very broad sense, technological. The third point I was making was that the technology was a way of forgetting about the planet. Except it was also high technology of space war, space investigation, climate science, that eventually delivered the news of climate problem. So the technology that actually helped destroy the planet was also a technology that gave us the scientific knowledge that things were actually more related. And through that, it is, often I say it is through the intensification of modernization across the globe, particularly after China opened up, India opened up, that intensification, the creation of a much bigger middle class that revealed the Earth system, the life support system of the planet, because there was a crisis of the life support system that we had created. So just the last point I want to make, when I look at the world, I see three classes. I see a class that I belong to, which I call the class that is locked into a high energy lifestyle. Bill Gates is locked in through his profits, or Elon Musk is locked in through his profits. I am locked in through my pension funds. So for the rest of my life, I want my pension funds to do well. So I don't wish death on capitalism until I die, at least. But these people are locked in. So this is the locked in class. And there are these 2.5 billion people without fresh water, without housing, the people who died in Sudan, people who are now dying in other parts of the world, including in India, who have health problems, poor people because of climate change, they are almost locked out. And in between are the younger generation, most of you here, whom I think of as not yet locked in. Their parents are locked in, these people are not yet locked in. Some of them will become locked in, but some of them, out of idealism, because of the crisis, may opt not to be locked in. So the not yet, Heidegger had a beautiful way of explaining not yet. He said you can understand the not yet meaning something that is yet to happen but will happen. That's Bill Gates' vision, that one day everybody will have a high energy lifestyle. Pierre's work and other work beautifully illustrates why that is not possible. We can come back to that question. And Heidegger says not yet could mean yet to be locked in, but will yet to happen, but will happen. The other meaning is never to happen. That not yet is structural. So my hope lies in some sort of future alliance between the not yet locked in, because the people who are already locked in have lived structures of life that are about denial. So for people like me and even richer people, somebody recently wrote saying, it is as though these people do not believe what they know. So if you look at my everyday life, it's a structure of denial. I act as though I don't believe what I know. The locked out people have no option to come into my class. And then there are these not yet locked in. And I hope there's an alliance will grow between the not yet locked in, the locked out, and the non-human, both living and non-living, who are going to be part of the transition that is to happen. So I'll stop there for the time being, just making those 4 points. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. That's a pretty hard act to follow. I made a strategic mistake. I let Dipesh go first. I should have started. Okay, I'll do my best to follow. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. I'm delighted to speak with such a diverse audience of, what were your categories again? The not yet locked in? Yeah.
Probably more locked in than you believe.
Yeah. So Dipesh and I have been in dialogue now for many happy years. We've taught classes together at Chicago. And I think very recently I've begun to notice that he's starting to yield some ground in this argument we've been having now for 10, 15 years. Oh, maybe Fredrick was right about a few things. So I've been working in dialogue with Dipesh for a long time about two big projects. One is an intellectual history of how all of this happened, how we got into this mess. And here I've been paying close attention to Pierre's work as well. So this is the book that was just published in English called Scarcity, and it's coming out in French next year. But side by side with that, I've also been working on a book about the material life of coal, the politics of coal, starting in the 18th century and going up to about 1914. And that book I'm finally hoping to finish by Christmas. So I'll just say a few words about that, both those projects and how they connect. I think they nicely give us the historical background to the picture that Dipesh just painted. So first of all, what is a fossil fuel economy? What comes to mind when you think of fossil fuel? Well, naturally, you might think of steam engines, oil tankers, you might think of fighter planes. You might also, if you go a little wider, you might think of plastics, right? Pharmaceuticals. So all of that is also true in the early stages of the British fossil economy. So if you break it down and you think about all its components, it begins not with coal, but with water. It begins with a canal system, infrastructure that allowed coal, a very heavy commodity, to be carried around England. And wherever coal could flow on the canals, new towns, new manufacturers, factories, population gathered. So you can think about the canals as a new energy landscape, a zone of intensification where cheap coal can be used for many different purposes. The first great use for coal was in the household, in the home, to regulate heat, to cook with meat, with new kinds of ingredients from increasingly far away, first from Ireland, then from Europe, and then from Argentina and Australia, and many places. So inside the fossil fuel kitchen is a world ecology, a new way of thinking about the world. By the 1850s, the British have effectively begun to outsource their food supply to farther and farther peripheries, until the entire world has become a kind of farm field for British middle-class appetites. And this drives a dietary transition, a shift towards white bread, sugar, and meat. The fossil fuel kitchen is driving a change in taste, in diet, but also in biology. New illnesses of the gut, of teeth, come from all of this. Inside the kitchen, there is a whole world of labor that is mostly feminine. Housewives and female servants are driving this new fossil kitchen. They are the ones, because of course coal is heavy, it has to be carried up and down the stairs to the fires, and it leaves traces, pollution wherever you take it. So it also creates endless waste, right? All of that is a world of female labor that's almost invisible to the social commentaries of the time. You know, where does Karl Marx talk about the kitchen, I ask you, right? So this whole world of feminine labor has been erased. So that's the second chapter of my book. And I'll just walk you through very quickly the other facets of the fossil economy. The third one is iron. Iron. Iron smelting is the most carbon-intensive sector of the industrial economy in the late 18th and in the 19th centuries. So fossil energy embodied in iron and coke-smelted iron is a key ingredient of this new carbon-emitting economy. But the British embraced this new way of making iron by political choice. It was not a necessity. Because before that, they had been importing iron from Russia and from Sweden. High-quality iron made with charcoal. So why did they switch? It wasn't economics. It was politics. They switched because of you people. Because they were increasingly worried that French revolutionary, republican navies might disrupt the flow of iron from Scandinavia, from Russia to England. So the state, the government, the British government, began to prioritize homemade iron with coal. Why did they do that? For strategic military purposes. They saw that they were, for the Navy and the Army, for gunpowder, for guns, they needed high-quality iron. And when they realized they could get it within their own territory, this was a much safer option during the wars with France. So this is what I call the military origin of the fossil economy. And if you think this is just sort of antiquarian, typical stuff that historians only care about, think again. The French army, the French armed forces, the American armed forces are some of the biggest consumers of fossil fuel out there, right? For the same reason that the British converted to iron in the 1790s. So when we think about the fossil economy, we have to pay attention not just to the factories, the story that Marx tells about capitalism, about cotton production and so forth. That's important. But as I just hinted, I think we also have to tell a story about the household, about food, and we also have to think about the state and the priorities of the state in having a growth economy, right? You might say, okay, growth it's always driven by capitalists. They're the ones who want endless growth. Well, yes and no. States, from at least the 17th century on, have been increasingly committed to growth economies as well, right? Because the more the economy grows, the larger the revenue, the more taxes, right? And the larger the territory and the armies for states to control. So I think besides capital, there's a whole other separate logic of geopolitical security, control over territory, that feeds into the fossil economy. And then what Dipesh was talking about, I think, is the third domain, and that's the domain of life itself. Coal in the Victorian household was a key factor in driving down infant mortality. Anyone interested? That's great. Your bank. Yeah. Capitalists, exactly. It wasn't the state, the army they were calling. No, that's good. No, I just make one final point because I think this is terribly important, and it connects directly with what Dipesh was saying earlier. In the Victorian household from the 1830s, there's a very interesting change that happens. Not only do we start cooking more with coal in the kitchen, we start putting thermometers on the walls. Thermometers for what? To regulate room temperature. This is what I call the invention of room temperature. Now, why would you do that? What's behind it? It's medical. It's primarily about health, and especially about children's health. When a child is born, it comes out of the warm, out of the uterus, out of the womb, and into the cold world. And to preserve its health, you must regulate the temperature in the nursery. There's a whole new room for children, for infants, called the nursery, invented at the same time. So regulating heat inside the home to keep children healthier. And secondarily, to heat water. Because having hot water will allow you to help the child regulate its internal temperature so that it avoids illness. They don't have germ theory yet, but they're aware of a link between hygiene and infant health. So you see, this is something else you don't find in Marx. This sense that fossil fuel is actually connected with life itself, with the biopolitics of life, with public health, with child rearing, with reproduction, not production. So I'll end on that note. But I hope I've given you a sense of the historical background to the kind of argument that Dipesh started us with.
Thank you very much both. Do you mind if I follow up in French? Okay. Parce que peut-être vous seriez... Okay. Merci. Oui, je crois que je suis trop fatigué pour parler anglais. Et puis je serai plus à l'aise. Bon, c'est très intéressant qu'on ait deux historiens qui aient commencé par prendre la parole, parce que, et notamment Dipesh CHAKRABARTY, qui a été un des premiers à alerter les humanités sur ce que le concept d'Anthropocène, c'est-à-dire la transformation systémique, irréversible des climats, des paysages, des milieux dans lesquels on vit. Il a attiré notre attention sur le fait que ça nous obligeait à revoir nos cadres conceptuels, nos chronologies, tout au fond, tout ce qui fait l'ordinaire de nos pratiques disciplinaires. Et je pense qu'il y a un point qui est nécessaire de rappeler dans cette soirée, c'est que la crise environnementale n'a jamais provoqué la nécessité d'écrire une nouvelle histoire du processus de modernisation. C'est la grande différence, c'est l'une des grandes différences entre une crise environnementale et une crise, appelons-la la crise climatique ou l'Anthropocène. Les dégâts environnementaux du processus de modernisation sont connus depuis très longtemps, depuis le tout début en fait. Ils sont connus, ils sont gérés, ils sont parfois compensés, parfois laissés de côté, mais ils ne sont pas de nature à nous, me semble-t-il, et en tout cas c'était un des messages du texte de Dipesh, et explique aussi Fredrick dans son travail, vous voyez, où il montre comment la civilisation du charbon redescend jusqu'au plus ordinaire de vos pratiques quotidiennes et remonte jusqu'aux plus ultimes justifications de l'État, la sécurité, hein, les énergies étant des biens stratégiques tout autant et même plus que des forces productives. Donc tous ces mouvements en fait en répercussion de l'événement anthropocène dans les sciences sociales et en particulier en histoire sont quelque chose qui montre bien que l'environnement et le climat ou l'Anthropocène, ce sont deux choses complètement différentes. De la même manière, on peut dire que les crises environnementales, les pollutions par exemple, toutes ces choses-là, n'ont pas réellement eu d'effet profond, restructurant sur l'ordre géopolitique. Par exemple, quand il s'est agi de se défaire des chlorofluorocarbonates pour éviter que le trou dans la couche d'ozone ne s'étende, un traité international a été trouvé assez rapidement, le traité de Montréal dans les années 80, parce qu'il y avait des substitutions possibles, et parce que ces chlorofluorocarbonates n'étaient pas la colonne vertébrale de l'économie mondiale, et qu'il n'y avait pas de redistribution des forces géopolitiques qui accompagnaient cette transformation-là. Ça, c'était un problème environnemental. Et ce qui s'est passé, la croyance sur laquelle on a longtemps vécu, et qui d'ailleurs est très bien expliquée dans le livre d'Ami Dahan et Stéphane Haïkout sur la gouvernance du climat, c'est que très longtemps on a pensé qu'on pouvait gérer le problème climatique comme un problème environnemental, en créant du consensus autour d'objectifs partagés, de transformation des émissions, et pas des formes de production, et pas des formes de vie. Et c'est ça qui a laissé penser que, au fond, la crise climatique, c'était qu'une grosse crise environnementale. Ce qu'elle n'est pas. En fait, il faudrait même dire, je pense, exactement l'inverse. La crise climatique se traduit très souvent par des phénomènes environnementaux, des pluies diluviennes, des températures extrêmes, des débordements marins. Ça, c'est des phénomènes environnementaux. Mais comme ils sont tous structurellement liés à un même changement qui est planétaire et qui n'est pas local, c'est ça qui en fait les expressions de quelque chose d'autre, enfin quelque chose de plus qui a une autre signification holistique qu'est le climat. Et donc, Dipesh CHAKRABARTY, Fredrick JONSSON, moi d'une certaine manière, sommes des gens qui nous disons, ok, qu'est-ce que ça change à la connaissance que nous avons du passé ? Donc c'est pour ça que, par exemple, c'est extrêmement important de reprendre l'histoire des formes d'émancipation, sachant désormais que ces formes d'émancipation ne vont pas sans facture climatique, reprendre les transformations de la vie quotidienne, que par exemple expliquait Fredrick tout de suite, en sachant que c'est ainsi, d'ailleurs, pour prendre la très belle expression de Dipesh qu'il a introduite tout à l'heure, hein, les gens comme nous qui sont enfermés dans les infrastructures de la vie de l'Anthropocène, c'est comme ça qu'elles sont apparues. Quand le charbon, quand la haute intensité énergétique ne sont plus quelque chose qui est autour de nous, au-dessus de nous, C'est d'ailleurs effectivement un des problèmes de l'analyse en termes de capitalisme, c'est que ça donne l'impression que c'est autre chose que nous. Mais non, en fait, c'est intériorisé dans des pratiques. Il n'y a pas que le fonds de pension de Dipesh, et c'est aussi intériorisé dans nos pratiques quotidiennes. Alors, pour ma part, j'avais aussi essayé de prolonger ces réflexions-là, en partie d'ailleurs sous l'influence de mes collègues qui sont ici, en essayant de montrer, en remontant un petit peu en généralité, comment l'histoire du processus d'émancipation, de conquête de l'autonomie, était elle-même locked in, hein, était elle-même enfermée dans les infrastructures de la modernité fossile, et puis plus récemment, et au fond de manière encore plus spectaculaire, me semble-t-il, comment les infrastructures de paix, c'est-à-dire les interdépendances géopolitiques prétendument stabilisatrices, étaient elles aussi enfermées dans ces dispositifs-là. Ce qui, alors, et c'est là qu'on peut faire le rebond, that's where maybe Dipesh, you can again follow up. This all doesn't mean that we know how to log us out of those infrastructures of life. So there is a whole new debate, this time maybe more normative. So maybe, I don't know how much time we have. No time. Maybe a quick rebound from you, Dipesh, on this, because I'm pretty sure that's what the room expects from us.
So, okay.
Maybe we...
So about the locked-in, let me just make one observation, and I'm making it primarily of the United States, but United States is a very powerful country. What it does matters. In 2009, when I published my first article, I had a colleague in the geophysics division, David Archer, who wrote a book on climate change. The subtitle was How Humans Have Changed the Climate of the Planet for the Next 100,000 Years, in which book he said, 2009, almost 15 years ago, he said, it would be tremendous stupidity. This is a scientist saying, use the word stupidity in the text. He said it would be tremendous stupidity for human beings to put even more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, only to later produce very expensive technology to draw it down and put it underground. That stupidity is now a collective decision of the United States. Bill Gates supports it, my university supports it, the economists support it, and when I look at them individually, they're all very smart people. And how is it possible for very smart people to come together to make a decision that another smart person, not a Marxist, a scientist, has already called stupid? And the only way I can understand is by thinking about the locked-in nature of these people in different ways. Like for them, they understand the problem, but they can only think of this lifestyle continuing and becoming everybody's. This lifestyle will never become everybody's, because a rich country, as Pierre has showed, and others have also argued, they eat from their own country, they also eat from other countries. A poor country only eats from its own land. So there's not enough land to everybody to eat from their own land and other lands. So it'll never. But they are saying, we will do all this. And the petroleum companies are now saying at the COP28, they said, you can now enjoy carbon, enjoy oil, because you can take the carbon and put it underground. We are part of the solution. We are not part of the problem. And this is what America is embracing. My university is embracing it. Fredrick and I have strategically accepted to be on the advisory board of this policy. But I think it is collective stupidity because we are locked in. And the hope is not us. The hope is younger people, our children who are not yet locked in, and some of me who opt out of being locked in, and the people who are locked out. And the other thing to remember is that every decision, while we are making these decisions, making these choices, the world is being changed by the more powerful people. So carbon sequestration will happen. Geoengineering will happen. The sky may become permanently white. If they want to try to cool down the planet by reflecting sunlight, you have scattered sunlight. Scattered sunlight makes the sky look white. No blue sky to write about. But in effect, what we are doing, what the locked-in people are doing, are basically passing the problem on to another generation, to the never to be locked in. And that's where I think the fight is. That's where the fight has to happen, because the planet is not sitting idle while we do this. There'll be more of the heat waves and the crises. And so it's an open world. And so that's where I end. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So it's time now to open the room, right? Okay. Je te laisse, Martin, distribuer le micro. On va prendre quelques questions. Je vois déjà des bras qui se lèvent. Alors donc les questions en anglais, si vous voulez me faciliter la vie, en français, si vous voulez que je fasse... Sorry? Yeah, of course. Oui, monsieur.
Hi. Good evening. Thank you for this very interesting conversation. I had a question more specifically for Mr. Chakrabarty. I would like to know what makes you say that we are not yet locked in. Because when I see myself, when I see other young people, I'm telling myself we all wear clothes that we didn't make. We all eat food that we didn't produce. We all use high technology phones and all that. So how are we not yet locked in? I know this is a bit desperate as a question, but I wanted to have your point of view on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Your question actually shows that you are aware of what you're doing wrong. And many in India or China are not even aware of what they're doing wrong. And my hope is that I see young people all around in the university making choices, including my friend Fredrick here. He's made certain life choices. I know that he's made them. And I see other people making those choices. It is, if the American strategy succeeds, it will be your problem, or problem of even younger people. So that's why I think that the idealism of a Greta Thunberg, whatever is wrong with what she does, is that increasingly the Extinction Rebellion. So these are still fringe movements. Look at what the young people are doing. It's still fringe. But what is fringe today will become mainstream as an ideology. I'm not saying every young person will buy into it. Some of my students will join Wall Street and make 4 times the money that I make. But not everybody will. And it's because the crisis is real. And you can try to defer it. The planet doesn't sit still, and other things will happen. And I'll also ask Fredrick to join in on this question, because you're younger and you speak to young people and you see them.
Well, one way to think about this is, again, if you go back and think about the fossil economy in its entirety, as I just tried to illustrate, it's not simply production. It's not the cotton factory or the car manufacturer. It's also all these other dimensions: food consumption, residential consumption of coal, and so forth. And there, I would, one of the most radical choices you can make is to become a vegan. Right? And imagine a vegan political movement actually seizing power. There's a wonderful book by a comrade of mine, Troy Vitesse and Drew Prendergast, called Half-Earth Socialism, where they imagine a vegan planet leaving enough room to avoid a mass extinction, simply through the act of embracing veganism. So there will be different political strategies to minimize carbon emissions, because there are so many different. It's so on the one hand, I'm saying that it's hard because it's everywhere. The fossil economy penetrates every dimension, but it also means that there are many points of attack to divide it up. And I think it can be paralyzing to think about the whole of it. It can be enabling to think about individual pieces.
During this last decenny, we are in front of 2 main problems: the end of the fossil energy and the climate crisis. Okay? So many people claim that we cannot wait the end of the fossil because the climate will be so strong. But to be realist, the only solution today will be the end of the fossil. And all the structure of the society is based, like you say, on the fossil energy. So we will be aware and everything. So we need to prepare to this, I guess.
Thank you. Just very quickly, There's a book by this Canadian scholar called Václav Smil. The book is called How the World Really Works. And he says, you can't imagine a modern society without 4 things: glass, steel, concrete, and fertilizers. And all of these require fossil fuel in their current manufacturing process. But I'm saying, and he has a remarkable statement. He says, if we don't use modern fertilizers, there are all kinds of problems with modern agriculture. It's monocultural. He said, but if we don't use fertilizers, 40% of humanity will go without food. That's what I call the infrastructure of our life. This is what Fredrick was also talking about. And the price of a sudden transition is huge. But on the other hand, we need to transition away. And I look at my class and people over me, the university is making it. So I feel I live in structures that are locked in to fossil fuel structures. And I look to structures where I find hope, locked out, and people who will opt out.
Thank you. I wonder, you said that fossil and other commodities we are eating from other places are enabling to have our lifestyles. You talked about state, home, but what about values? How did it change our values?
Dipesh whispered, that's for me, so I'll go ahead. Yeah, one way to think about the world of fossil fuel is that it's a cosmology, it's a worldview, and it prevents us from seeing some things while focusing the mind on others, just as Dipesh said. So what enables, what ideas are giving us, are fueling our economy, are making us complacent, are making us deny the problem? In the book I just finished called Scarcity, I point the finger at economic ideas. Think economics as a mainstream form of expertise has a lot of the blame in this problem, in that it teaches us that growth is always good, and that humans are inherently insatiable. We have appetites that we're always trying. We are born consumers, and there's no alternative to that. This is a good thing. Scarcity in this vision is never absolute. It's always relative, meaning if you run into a limit, markets and science and technology will solve the problem by finding a substitute. Right? So this is what I call the worldview of substitutionism. There's always, economics teaches us that whenever we run out of something, we can find a replacement. This ideology, this worldview, first came out of the British economists in the 1870s and 1880s. So it's actually a product of the fossil economy that I described earlier. And it has, after that point, become implanted and become a dogma in neoclassical economics. And it's still important to this day, at least if you go into a classroom and you have a Econ 101, Introduction to Economics. And I think it also is it's in our political elites who are taught economics of a certain kind in just that way. Now, I don't mean to say that economists are the only people to blame here. That's not the point. But if you're looking for one idea that's particularly dangerous, it's this idea of substitution. Because it occludes all the ways, all the things that cannot be replaced, like the ocean, like the air, right? So to come back to a worldview that accepts limits and accepts that there are things that can never be substituted, it would be a very radical move.
Yeah, hello. I would like to ask the question that, like, you have said that engineers, scientists have transformed the world in the past, like maybe a few centuries, in a wonderful way that you've, made life much better. Of course, it's not perfect because there's pollution and climate is heating. But why should we bet against these people that they can't solve the problems that are kind of a secondary effect of what they have done? So why do we have to be so pessimistic and bet against them when they have succeeded so much?
Well, I think if I can take this quickly, I think I think Dipesh would agree too, we're optimistic that decarbonization might happen. It's just that it's happening too slowly, right? I actually think there's a second big problem if we solve climate change. The second big problem is biodiversity. And it may be an even more difficult problem because it requires land. And the more we grow, the less land we have. And I'm not talking about humans sharing, I'm talking about sharing with non-human, who don't even have a voice, who don't have a vote, right?
The other thing to add quickly to that, biodiversity is one thing, forests another thing, and resources. So at the moment, humans are using sand at a rate that is higher than the rate at which the earth produces sand. So if you look for the politics of sand mining, a lot of it's done illegally. India is one of the countries where sand is mined illegally every day by politicians. And it kills rivers. Because illegally they dredge the river and the entire ecology, the river dies. So without sand you can't make concrete. And China, in 2017 and 2019, produced as much cement as the US produced all over the 20th century. That's the rate of the pace of development. And we are running out of sand. So biodiversity, but also natural resources.
We're going to close on this very hopeful note, or?
Well, on this hopeful note, I will say there's an American scientist who distinguishes between hope and hopium.
Yeah.
So you want hope, but not hopium.
Yes.
That is hope as opium.
Ok, je pense qu'on va s'arrêter là, c'est ça, merci. Merci à nos invités, à Fredrick, à Dipesh, et merci à tout le monde ici. Bonne suite de cette soirée.